I wanted to ask you about the transition from Armored Saint to Anthrax, because I find it interesting that Dave Jerden was a common denominator during that transition period. He had just worked with you on Symbol of Salvation as producer, Dave Jerden.
Right.
Known primarily for his work with Jane's Addiction. I think he did Alice in Chains. He was kind of an alternative. Yeah, he was kind of an alternative grunge guy. And then you joined Anthrax, and I believe, did he produce Sound of White Noise? Is that correct?
Yep.
Right. Okay. So my question is, did he kind of come along with you during that transition? And was there sort of a conscious discussion among the members of Anthrax that said, we need to change our sound either to fit the times or to fit John's voice? But there's obviously a very noticeable change in the sound of Anthrax at that time. And so how much of that is Dave Jerden's influence? How much of that is your voice? And how much of it is Anthrax saying, we need to change something?
Well, I say it was probably all of the above, and everything contributing to that. And when I joined, of course, it was time to embrace my voice. So to do something to work with my voice would be a logical thing. It would be dumb to change a singer and then say, well, we're not going to embrace this. We're going to still do what we do exactly. You want to be open-minded. It was a new decade. Things were changing. I don't think it wasn't like all of a sudden, let's change the whole sound of the band. Of course not, because they were extremely established and were very important to metal with what they did. But it was an embracing of that, because we loved everything that was happening at that time. There was some amazing bands, and it was time for a new decade, and so we went with it. I think it was just circumstantial that I worked with Dave, and then they were like, well, we want to use Dave Jerden. And I was like, well, I love Dave. I just worked with Dave, so let's do it. It was that simple regarding using Dave. But I think using Dave was based on his body of work at that point, and everyone loved what he did with Alice in Chains and Jane's Addiction, and so it was normal and to want to work with him because he was happening and red hot at the time. So and I think Sound of White Noise is an amazing album. I think it was probably almost a little ahead of its time in some weird way, but the songs really did take on a whole nother kind of movement of Anthrax, and it just sounded like it felt new and like it was really just of the very current, but even maybe, like I said, at some point, almost as time has gone on, it feels like it could have even come out later than it did. But yeah, it was a great time to work with Dave and to make music at that point, and for me to be able to say, okay, I'm gravitating to these other musicians, and let's see what they can bring out in me as a writer and a singer, and it was awesome. It was a great time.
There was a lot of great material during your time with the band. Some great moments. Random Acts of Violence. Inside Out is one of my favorites of all fucking time. That's so fucking great, the way that song builds.
Yeah, it was great live too. It was always a cool live song.
It's just a chug of a riff, and there's the dynamic. You know what I mean? So fucking cool.
Yeah,
and some commercial value, if I may stretch a little bit on that, because of the anthemic sections.
Yeah,
big anthemic.
Yeah, the thing about my time in Anthrax, what I always tell people is that it was part of a change that was happening, and that's what kind of threw it into this kind of uncertainty, I think. And I think that was all kind of normal. I think that was happening for a lot of artists. Who knows how it would have been if actually they didn't get me and they kept with Joey in the band. They probably still would have went through a transition into the 90s, because most bands did, who are from the 80s. Some were able to weather it. Some, maybe they sustained it to a certain level of success, or dipped a bit and came back. I don't know too many bands actually, well, other than Metallica, of course, that went further. But yeah, it was a hard time, to make that adjustment to a new decade, and let alone changing singers, and that would have that made it harder, of course. But I'm super proud of those records. I think that they are all really cool on their own merits, and all a little different from one another. And I was having a great time during all those early years in Anthrax, because for me, I had taken a step up of success. I went from playing small clubs with Saint to half filled halls to much bigger ones, and much bigger attendance. So even though for them the decline happened in the 90s, in particular, from Stomp On, for me it was an upcline, an incline. So I was like, this is great. And they're like, so last time we played here, we played the big hall, and this time we played. I'm like, oh, well, last time I played was the dumpy club down the street in front of like 50 people. This is awesome.
I played the gutted out 7-Eleven last time.
Right. So like, dude, this show is sold out.
Perspective is everything, right?
I remember where I was when I heard the news that you accepted, or that you accepted the offer. I was in Hawaii.
Oh wow.
And I was in a hotel room, probably having drinks with Mike Graves and Dan Corporal.
Nice.
Dude.
His life passed, but he was a great.
Yeah. And the Toys were over there playing a couple shows.
That's
and
great.
It would have been probably, I guess, like, see if this sounds right, summer of '92?
I think it was official like in April. So it was like,
oh, okay. All right.
Spring.
All right. So spring of '92. And one of them like had just come from home or something and heard the news on the street, and was like, we were there just hanging in the hotel, having drinks and just talking shit, shooting the shit. And he knew I would want to know. He's like, hey man, have you heard? I'm like, what? And I was like, whoa. I think Dan Corporal was the one that told me.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that was a hard thing to do because, back then, we held on, by our fingernails to make sure that Saint was going to, get through all the trials and tribulations that we did. And it was really hard for me to leave. As a matter of fact, I said no the first time. And then they came back, luckily for me, and said, hey, man, you should reconsider this. And I was like, yeah, I probably should. And I had a couple of friends of mine who I talked to who were not in the band who were like going, are you an idiot? And I'm like, I guess I am. Yeah. Right. And then so like, and it was only because of that crazy, undying, sick love for Saint and the members and the things that we went through, in particular, just before that with Dave and going through his illness and then him passing away. So I did feel like I was abandoning them, of course. But it's like, again, in retrospect, looking back, that was just the way it was supposed to go. That was his story. Yeah. And that's how life goes. And, luckily we kind of, we picked up and done so much since then. But that's just the way it is.
I hate to interrupt, but it's almost like, do you feel like you got the okay from your Saint bros to do it?
At the time, I don't think everybody was feeling great by it, and that's normal. I think that it created this kind of uncertainty in their individual lives, and so they probably were scared, and I understand, and maybe didn't feel too great about it. But, and at that, I can't, they should feel however they felt at that time. That's, of course, that's just normal for them to process it however they wanted to. But, the beauty of it is that time has gone on and we've been able to make all these other records since then and resume as a band.